We have Fred Brown joining us once again, our epidemiologist extraordinaire. And Fred, we're going to be talking about mutations today, if I recall from your note. Yes?
That's right. We'll talk a little about mutations because we went over a little bit, but I was at a conference. I actually didn't attend. I attended virtually with the UK, and they're having some challenges with mutations that I think are worthwhile taking a look at. But first, we probably should talk about the vaccine distribution.
Yes.
What do you
Yes.
think? So I thought I would show you a quick slide if it's helpful.
Yep.
But we're welcome to answer any questions if you have any at first you want to go
Well,
over.
that's queuing up. Right now, I know of the Moderna and the Pfizer, but I'm hearing AstraZeneca has been approved overseas and Johnson and Johnson's just around the corner, but I don't know if they've been approved in the states.
That's right. J&J should probably be. So we'll probably have a readout of the J&J data. My guess is mid-February.
Okay.
They'll get done with their trials. I think at toward the end of January, and then mid-February we should have a readout. And I think by March 1st, J&J will be on the market with a single dose vaccine, which
Hmm.
will be exciting. Um, AstraZeneca was approved, and if you like, we can take a look at some of that data,
Sure.
which is sort of interesting. Um, maybe I should maybe I should start off though with how we're doing overall um, with vaccines generally, because right now we have two vaccines that have been authorized. They haven't been approved yet. With emergency use authorization, we're allowed to authorize them and we're able to take them because we're under emergency and having so much challenges with COVID. And
Right.
this is the situation in Michigan. 90,453 people have been vaccinated as of this morning.
Oh.
so, so that's a good start.
Hmm.
But we had we received 337,000 doses.
Really?
So yeah, so we actually distributed less than a third of the doses that we received
What's the
up to date.
holdup then? Is it why are we not getting these out? Do you know?
Well, let's take a look at that. I think there are three reasons for that. So you can see here we've covered 1.3% of the prioritized population. The prioritized population is about 4.31 million people. So about 40% of our population is considered priority. That means that they are over 65, essential or healthcare worker. That's how we define that. Phase one will be 75 years and older and healthcare workers. Phase two will be 65 years and older and essential workers. Phase three will go into everybody at that point, with essential workers being kind of part of phase three. Um, uh, uh, and then phase four is everybody. So that's the way it'll work. That's how we've prioritized. And we've been allocated 576,100 doses. That's 13% of the prioritized population. So we should be able to go through that pretty quickly. My guess, though, is that we're going to have trouble. And here's why. I wrote a book for all the people in all the different jurisdictions, 130 pages of why we know how to avoid having problems.
And,
And
and
they're
we and we did every one of them, right? So
Oh man, yeah. So the first thing we did is we didn't really prepare properly. We didn't get real-time systems up and running so we could communicate between the people who are distributing and the people who are supplying the vaccine. We didn't qualify enough vaccinator sites up front. And so now we're doing that qualification, and so it's taking us time. And then we didn't ask for our most critical patients, which are people in nursing homes, um, whether they wanted to have the vaccine. And most of these people have to sign consent forms. And we should have been doing that already in November and December. You know, so those things were missed. And so now we're just sort of getting out of the January 1st doldrums. And of course, we are on a trip of just an incredible problem with COVID generally. And we really are in an epidemic situation. We had over 1.5 million people traveling over Christmas vacation, despite our recommendations, Mike. We recommended not to travel. 1.5 million people a day were traveling.
oh boy.
And so those guys, my guess is, 1% of those people will die, sadly. 2% will end up in intensive care unit wards, and probably 5 or 6% will end up in the hospital. That's a lot of people.
A lot
And
of
so
people.
and the problem is we start to overwhelm our hospitals. We're getting better at caring for people, but it takes longer for them to get to survive, right? Because if you die
Hmm.
quickly, then you're going to empty a hospital bed. But if you die slowly and then get better, you don't empty the hospital bed. So we're really overwhelming the hospitals, which is going to be a challenge. Everyone I know who's working at hospitals is just completely burned out, right? They've been working 12-hour days every day since March. That you just can't sustain that. And right now we're getting to our peak of having to vaccinate everybody and having to take care of more people than ever. And
Hmm.
that's wow, right? That's
Yeah,
really rough.
having known many nurses in my life and dated some of them, I know that there's the burnout issue to begin with being a nurse,
Oh yeah.
but this is extraordinary times for nurses and of course doctors and everybody else associated with this. But you have to wonder if all these women that are and men that want to go into nursing are now going to reconsider that after this, right?
Well, and sadly, if you look at the healthcare workers, they are much more impacted by this virus from a health standpoint than others. They're already overtired, not sleeping enough, not as well nourished as they probably should be, and so they're more susceptible generally. And then nurses represent about 40% of the total number of healthcare professionals getting infected. So
Mm-hmm.
the nurses really are taking the brunt of
Right.
this, with the doctors, of course, being a lower percentage of the population, but also being 10% affected. So,
We're both in Ann Arbor, and I know I saw a statistic that the U of M alone employs like 4,000 nurses up
oh yeah,
there on the hill where all those hospitals are.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. They're the front line. They are they are what makes us better or not.
Right.
Just their care. So this is the situation we've got. And you asked, what is the problem? The problem is we had a 20 million person goal. Remember, we were
Hmm.
saying by the end of the year, we're going to try to vaccinate 20 million people. We shipped only 12 million doses, so we couldn't have achieved our goal, but we only actually injected 2.7 million people as
Oh,
of December 31st, 2020. And so we really were off by almost a factor of 10. And now uh, President-elect Biden wants to do 100 million patients in the first 100 days of his presidency. And that's going to be really rough because if we're starting from a point of only doing, you know, only doing a few 100,000 a day, about 500,000 a day, and you want to get to 25, 20, kind of 70, I guess you want to get to about 75,000 or 100,000 shots per day.
yep.
Um, wow, you got there's a long way to go up that ramp, and you can see. I think there are three critical factors. The first is, can we manufacture enough of it? We have very constrained raw materials. It's a very complex process, very little experience. I'll show you that in a second with this kind of vaccine. The distribution, we've got an allocation bureaucracy we talked to a little about before. We want to make sure we get the sickest and most at risk for transmitting people vaccinated first. The problem is if you hold up everybody else because you're figuring out where those people are and trying to get to them and deciding whether they want the vaccine, and then you start losing time. And our biggest bottleneck right now is actually the vaccinator sites. We
Yeah.
can't vaccinate we need to open up like Henry Ford, the Ford Field. We have to do like 5,000-6,000 people in a day at a single site, and we just aren't equipped to do that. We're equipped to do kind of onesie twosies at local Walgreens, and that's actually the biggest problem we're going to have in the short term. I think we'll overcome it eventually with big events, but
I
it's
did
going to take.
read in one of the competing publications that the U of M is using the football stadium
Yeah.
up in the upper tiers where the alumni and the high rollers are, those boxes. But I think it's more of the internal there and vaccinating their own people. I assume once they get through all that, they could turn that over and bring in the public, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure that's planned. I'm sure they're going to be doing that, and because they don't want them clocking up the hospitals. That then you get well people interacting with sick people, and then you have real challenges. If you can take them off the site of the hospital, that would be ideal. And so on. I think that
Sure.
U of M will be doing that. I haven't talked to U of M directly about their overall plans. I've talked to them about vaccination procurement, which I think would be helpful to them, but I haven't talked to them about dispersion. Uh, like I have with the rest of the state. And then finally, the last big issue we've got is communication, right? We talked about the fact there's very little communication within the supply chain. We actually know what's going on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you think about trying to vaccinate 1% of your population every day
Wow.
at a peak, and you're only getting the information once every other day. you can
Yeah.
you can get off really really fast to the supply chain that with this kind of a fragile supply chain that has to that has very short time frames in which you have to vaccinate once you open the pack. And the other big thing is we're not really monitoring herd immunity yet. That slide I showed you from what was from the Washington Post, and
Right.
that is trying to monitor herd immunity, but that has to get out more. So this is sort of where we are right now. And here's what manufacturing looks like. I don't know if you ever thought about how they manufacture this stuff,
No.
but this is extremely high technology. We're talking about getting a DNA template. So you're talking about a very, very small uh, piece of piece of the DNA that is exactly templated so that you get what you want, so that it codes for the protein and the RNA that you want. So you create this template, and then you put all the RNA materials into a vat and you incubate. So the first thing you've got to do in order to do the template is you got a cell culture. Well, cell cultures are hard to ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
It's cell by cell, very low yields, and then you got to purify all that stuff because you want to make sure you just get the right ones, not everything that you put in there. And then you got to linearize it. So you got to make it flat so it codes nicely, doesn't all fall up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move into the next phase, and for example, Pfizer does that first phase in St. Louis, and then they move that whole template over to then they move it all over to Andover, Massachusetts, and then they put all the messenger RNA materials and all the things they need to put into the vat. They stir it around, cook it a little while, and incubate it, and then the DNA slowly produces all this mRNA. And then
Mm-hmm.
you've got to pull that out, and you've got to stabilize the mRNA because the mRNA is real small and super fragile, right? I mean, these are molecules that are designed to unzip, reproduce, and rezip again. So
Hmm.
they're the forces that hold them together are tiny, mostly van der Waals forces. So it's very, very hard to keep these things going. Then you got to purify the whole thing, and you can't purify it too rigorously. You're going to break it all up and destroy it. So
Hmm.
that all happens at the next site. Then they move it all the way across. They move all the fragile mRNA all the way across the country to Kalamazoo, our state, our place. And Kalamazoo, what they do is they encapsulate the mRNA. It's all carefully manufactured with an oil, with a lipid. And
Mm-hmm.
the lipid has to be a certain size. You can see that it has to be about 100 nanometers. If it's too big, it starts getting caught up in the liver, caught up in the kidneys, doesn't release properly. If it's too small, the immune system doesn't recognize it as being a foreign body. So it's got to be just the right size. You got to encapsulate just the right stuff into it. And then it has to sneak by and sneak into the cells. And that's the vaccine. And then it starts producing the protein that you're interested in. So it's sort of a miracle this stuff even works, right? I mean, this is very challenging stuff to do. And then you've got to, fill it all in a small vials,
Right.
which all sterilized process. And these are brand new manufacturing facilities, largely. So you're bringing them on stream. It's all super regulated. You got to have the FDA come in, take a look at everything, make sure you're passing all the right stuff. Then you got to splash freeze it all, and then you start shipping it around the country. Having
Pretty
said all that,
crazy.
I think we're going to be okay with manufacturing.
Yes. That's well. Let me get you back to. I know, if you don't mind, I know you shared with us that you have talked to the Biden administration
Yeah.
and advised them. By Memorial Day, he wants to get those 100 million vaccinations done, given all the issues that we now face. Is that realistic?
I think we're going to miss. I think we're going to be at about 75 million now. It'll
Okay.
be, but not too bad, right?
Right.
So the real big issue that I was talking about was the fact that we don't distribute into big operations. We don't line up like we do in the army.
Sure.
Everyone lined up and you vaccinate 100,000
With the
men
little gun thing. Yeah. Right.
with a
So.
gun. We don't do that very well here. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest issue, and so I think we're going to solve that issue probably around the 100-day mark, and then we'll slowly roll out from there. But I think through March we're going to be pretty frustrated.
Well,
That's
we
my
were
guess.
talking earlier about maybe using the National Guard because that's what they do really well. That's what they're trained to do, those sorts of things, and getting them involved. Where maybe like I don't know whether you could just like roll up in a car and roll
Yeah.
down your sleeve, roll up your sleeve and get zapped or whatever. I don't know if that's the way it could be done, but what do you think?
That's what my recommendation was to do with mobile units, was to have mobile
Okay,
units to have the vaccines that were able to move around state to state. And we don't need that many mobile units to do that. And we'll see whether or not they accept the advice or not.
sure.
Those most mobile blood units that have refrigeration capabilities and so on, those could be the things that I think could pull us out of this problem. If not, it's going to be catch as catch can, lots of learning curves, different experiences, and so on. It can be frustrating. I did want to talk a little bit about the mutations, as you pointed out, though,
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
and that is a tricky area. And we talked about it early, and basically, this is even if you've got a very good vaccine, we've got a 95% efficacious vaccine with almost no side effects or serious adverse events. And the problem is that the virus moves around quite a bit. It can mutate, and that can cause it to have higher transmissibility, higher virulence rates, and of course the host. We're all a little bit different, and so differences in the host can make a difference. Your age, predisposition, health status, and so on. So we are at a point where we think this vaccine, this Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, is largely in that upper right-hand corner where one vaccine is working for everybody initially. But the problem is that over time, either you've got a waning problem, like we have with the flu. Every year you have to retake the flu, and that requires a lot of boosters. Or if you have a very high mutation rate, you can even cause brand new kinds of disease to come out. And so you have to get new vaccines, not just a booster for the old vaccine. So let's
Hmm.
take a look at that, as, at what we've done, because and you remember you mentioned, gosh, what about that variant in the United Kingdom? I
Right.
want to know more about that. Remember? And
Yep.
so we talked briefly about that. Well, now we know a lot more because the United Kingdom actually has one of the best genetic sequencing operations in the world. And so we can
Hmm.
actually look at the genetic sequences of these viruses and trace where they come from, how fast they're mutating, who's got them, who doesn't have them, what part of the country they're in, and so on. And it's quite interesting work. And so here's what we found. What we've done is we've created basically all our antibody therapeutics and our vaccines and our diagnostics are all based on the spike protein, right? That's the coronavirus, like a big ball with spikes on it. And those
Hmm.
spikes are at the tip, and those spikes come in. They latch onto our cell, and they look around for the angiotensin, the ACE2 inhibitor. They find the ACE2. I'm sorry, they find the ACE2 binding site, and they bind to it. And so we thought, aha, if they have to bind to that, if we have a vaccine or a antibody or a diagnostic that also binds to that, then we've got something that will bind to the virus, and we can tell much more about the viral load. We can stop the virus. We can clog it all up, and it won't be available for binding. And so we created all these diagnostics and therapeutics and vaccines that target the spike protein on the Wuhan lineage. So the Wuhan, remember, was where it all started.
Hmm.
And we started that January. We had the genetic code already January 10th. So we've been working steadily on creating something for the Wuhan virus variant. And we, um, what's nice about the code about these viruses generally is that they have a slower mutation rate than many. They mutated about half the rate as the flu, but one mutation every 10 transmissions. That comes out to 2 amino acid replacements per month, which means you've got about 10 to the minus 3 sites per year changing,
Hmm.
which doesn't sound like too much. That sounds like it's manageable. Um, but the problem is that if we have mutations that are localized in the spike protein, it could change our ability to treat it, right? Because everything we're going at is at the spike protein. And it turns out we actually have to do that. Because if we don't go after the spike protein, we actually could cause what they call ADE, or antibody, well, it's an enhancement of the virus. And
Hmm.
unintentionally, you've got this antibody that attaches itself to the virus. It doesn't affect the spike protein, and so it changes the virus and can make it more virulent.
Hmm.
So you don't want to do that.
No.
And so you got to go after the spike protein. Well, unfortunately, we found that despite the fact we do very little genetic sequencing in the United States, sadly. Only about 0.3% of our of the positive samples that come back are actually looked at. The UK actually does that at 7.4%. So they're about 20 times, they do more than 20 times the amount we do. Japan does about 10 times the amount, and so on. You can see Australia is a winner here with 58%. We're going to have to start doing this much more because here's why. It turns out that the spike protein in these viruses has a lot of what they call plasticity. It means that it can still attach itself to our ACE2 binding site, but have changed quite a bit. And in fact, what we're finding is it actually is getting better at binding to the ACE2 inhibitor site, the ACE2 binding site, and not worse. And so there are two big variants that have come through. The first one is the one that we talked about in the UK, and that has two deletions, and that causes its ability to bind to the ACE2 site in our bodies 85% better than before.
Mm-hmm.
And it also produces a lot more phlegm and stuff, a lot more of what they call viral shedding.
Mm.
So you're not only is it more more attracted to your body, but you're actually the people who are infected produce more of it to attack your body. And so what happens is this is transmitting very, very fast. And what happens is these little mutations that we didn't think were going to be so important actually have a chance to live, right? Because they're transmitting so much faster if they're attached to the other mutation that we've got a lot more genetic variation than we thought we would, and that's going to cause a lot more disease.
Mm.
So right now, if you look at D1.1.7, that's the variation. It has 17 mutations compared to the Wuhan lineage. So you look at the old Wuhan one, it was almost quite a different molecule than and that's what we actually have all our medicines for, than what we're actually trying to attack now. And the way viruses work is this will become the virus. This will become COVID in UK. There won't be any more Wuhans left, pretty much. It'll all be this virus that's so much more transmittable. And this directly, of course, impacts our herd immunity targets because it actually changes R. And remember, R and the herd immunity, it's one minus one over R. So the more your R increases, the more percentage of the population you're going to have vaccinated in order to stop this virus.
Hmm.
The other one is this FO1V2 South African variant. And this apparently is more deadly to the young people who get it. We haven't gotten statistical data yet. And it's actually so different from the Wuhan virus that we're not sure that our vaccines even going to work against it. So
now, the variation, part of that be ethnicity, perhaps, or something, or
there could be something with the host. Luckily, Johnson & Johnson does have active vaccination trials on, and as does AstraZeneca. They actually have active trials down there. And so we're going to be able to find out pretty quickly whether it works or doesn't work. But we have to make sure that they are able to look at and look at the strain for people who are getting the vaccines now. So that's going to increase the amount of study we do. So here's what happened in South Africa. See that yellow bar? Now, South Africa tests about as much as we do. And you can see that they were completely surprised because from October 5th, you didn't see anything, any of this variant. And by November 30th, about a month later or so, it was over 90% of their sample. So that's a real fast penetration of a very much more active virus, right? And this is the one we don't think is going to actually, our vaccines may not even work against it. Now let's take so that's what happens in South Africa, where we don't have very good control. In England, we have much better control. And you can see that slowly but surely, this variant, this is the B1.1.7 variant that we're worried about also. Basically, it got to about 1%. It was sort of baseline levels all the way from January all the way through. This is 10, so this is 10/1. That would be October 1st. And you can see it kept going a whole month. It was about 1%, kept going, and by around the middle of November, it was around 2%, and all of a sudden, it is now about 80% of the total new virus we're seeing in the UK. Well, the UK kind of panicked.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "Holy cow!" You know, because what happened is the UK put on really aggressive lockdown measurements right at the 31st of October. Remember, you couldn't go to a pub, you couldn't go on public transportation. Everyone, all the schools were shut down. They went on really advanced um, lockdown. And you can see on that blue, if you measure the blue lines, they're actually coming down. So the old measures worked for the blue lines, right? We've designed our measures for the blue lines. The blue lines work. Well, they don't work for the orange one.
Hmm.
Despite incredible draconian lockdown measures, nothing's working on this orange one. So they're panicking. All right. And in spite of locking down even more, every one of their every country of the UK, they got 4 kingdoms, um, is now at what they call level 4. That means you can hardly move. you,
Hmm.
know, you can't do anything. And in spite of that, it's still growing. So and you can see this taking off. So they put in new distancing measures. They put in and now they're recommending let's go ahead and try to go with single dose vaccine. Just let's get vaccines into everybody as fast as we can. In fact, and if you don't know which vaccine you had before, that's okay. Just take two. Take two of anything you got. We'll just mix and match here. And you know what? This hospital that you guys used to go to for everything, it's only going to be for COVID. And so these are huge operations. These are big shifts. And the other thing they did was they approved the AstraZeneca vaccine. And let's take a look at that. So here is our vaccine, right? And that's the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. And you can see that we had a very good outcome. Great vaccine. Now here's the AstraZeneca vaccine. They looked at a lot fewer people than we did, right? They looked at about a third to a quarter of the people we did in fact, AstraZeneca,
Mm-hmm.
and the males were underrepresented. They only had 40% male, 60% female.
Hmm.
But the worst thing is over 65. They only had 600 people over the age of 65 vaccinated with the active ingredient.
Hmm.
And that is not enough. And those are the people who are most at risk. And you can see that the Black African American population is only 4%. So again, and they had to pool the data from 4 different trials, each of which had slightly different kinds of protocols. And so they actually are vaccinating 1 dose, and then on average, they're waiting 8 to 12 weeks. They're waiting like 3, 4, 5 months later to have a second dose. And that actually gives them their best results, believe it or
Really?
not 4 weeks. The problem, though, is that in that period, after 1 dose, the efficacy is only 50%.
Hmm.
So you're sitting there with lots of people who are probably feeling, hey, I got my vaccine and going out and doing and having worse behavior, and they're actually not terribly well protected. After 2 doses, you're only at 70%. So my recommendation is wait till the U.S. approves this vaccine. Don't go to England, get a first dose of this stuff, and then come back and try to get a Pfizer Moderna. Keep your
Yeah.
Pfizer Moderna if you can, especially if you're elderly. So that's what's happened. And why don't we? I guess we're getting pretty close to the end. I can kind of talk about all the different things that are happening with you and that next week in terms of how we can combat this, because it is a big issue if our vaccines don't work. Um, because we got fast enough mutations and we get panicky and then start to allow sort of suboptimal therapeutics to get onto the market,
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to help our cause much. So,
Well, let me ask Dave. Dave, can we run over about 5 minutes? Is that fine?
sure, I can show you another one.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, keep firing.
So here are the mutation threats, right? The first mutation threat is that you get that they call escape. So the first thing that happens with mutation is you could escape from vaccine-induced immunity, and that's what we're worried about. That's what we're worried about in South Africa. We think that it's changed so much that it can escape our vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sure yet, so I've said no, but it's really unknown. It's not really the answer isn't really no. We just don't know. That makes sense. But it is very likely. The experts in the UK, both the UK looking at the B1.1.7 and the experts in South Africa looking at the 502V2 variants, are saying there's enough plasticity here in the binding site. They call the RBM. It's the area that really binds directly to that receptor that we've got on our cells in order
Mm-hmm.
to let the vaccine reproduce and enter our cells. They said probable, not just like probable. Usually, when we scientists say probable, it's over 60%
Hmm.
chance that we are going to have to find other we'll have to supplement our vaccines with other solutions. So what's likely to happen based on this, what we know so far, is that this might become an annual event. It might become an annual vaccine like the flu. Unfortunately, this thing is about it's probably 2 to 3 times more transmissible, and it's about 10 times more deadly than the flu.
Mm.
So it's it's just like the flu vaccine, except you better darn get it. You
Well,
can't,
it
or you're gonna get the gun.
sounds almost like whack-a-mole. Every time you get a solution for
That's a
something
great
somewhere
way.
in the world, then something else pops up elsewhere, right?
That's exactly. It's a perfect example of that of the sort of whack-a-mole approach that we're going to have to take with this thing. We're going to have to also probably do serology testing. That means every once in a while, probably once every half a year, maybe every year, you're going to go in and get a blood test, and they're going to then be able to say, here's the antibodies you've got to this thing. Your vaccine's still good, or you had COVID a couple months ago. You're still good to go. We still have high enough neutralizing what they call NAD, neutralizing antibodies in your blood that you're safe. But if you go down to a certain level, you're going to have to get a booster shot.
So you're
Or
thinking like every 6 months you'll have to get checked by somebody, you know?
if this is as bad as we think it is, it might be that often. I'm hoping it's once a year, but it's sort of on that range. And for older people, especially, I think we're more at risk, us older guys. And I think as a result of that, we're going to have to actually increase the amount of PPE we have and the amount of diagnostic testing we've got, because we want to know where those communities are that are having outbreaks and get to them fast, because we know that if the vaccine, if the virus has a chance to really replicate a lot, it's going to find new variants that are more successful against our vaccines. We want to actually suppress the viral outbreaks even faster than we do today. The second big, so that's escaping from vaccine-induced immunity, right? So
Hmm.
the other big question is, what about when you get infected? If you're naturally infected, how long do those antibodies last? And we think
Hmm.
right now more than 4 months, but we're not sure how much beyond 4 months. Right now, we do see cases of reinfection after 4 months. There have been, 10, 12, 15 that we've watched. So it is likely that we'll have these variants will actually allow for reinfection to occur.
Hmm.
It's probably less likely than the vaccine-induced immunity because there's not as much selective pressure, right? The vaccine actually puts a tremendous amount of selective pressure to find those ones fast, but whereas the natural immunity reinfection, you're not quite under as much selective pressure. But that means again, it's the same. It's the same result though. Probably more regular vaccination will be required. More PPE can be required. The next big question we've got is, gosh, what happens if this stuff actually increases the clinical severity, right? What happens if you get really sick? Right now we're getting sick and people are dying at 1% rates. What happens if it goes to 2, 3, 4, 5% rates?
Hmm.
Um, well, we think we're starting to see that anecdotally with the young people in South Africa.
Oh, really?
So we haven't confirmed it yet. It's just anecdotal. But I don't think it's that likely. I don't think it's quite as likely as the escape from immunity. And here we're going to have, if this does start to happen, though, we're going to have much better antiviral technology, much better, and especially symptom therapeutics. And we're going to have to, of course, do the serology to figure out where the antibody is, what kind of virus we've got.
Hmm.
The fourth thing about a genetic mutation is it can reduce your treatment effectiveness. And we have two kinds of treatment effectiveness. The one is when you actually treat this very sick person in bed, right? And that's what we're doing with remdesivir. That's what we're doing with some of these monoclonal antibodies. Is you get really sick and you go to the hospital, then you go ahead and get injected with the monoclonal antibody, and that really makes you feel better. And we saw that with President Trump. Um, uh, we need to have more options, right, for that, and especially the more antiviral option, not just symptomologic stuff. The biggest challenge, though, is that a lot of people, because we have a lot of this sitting on the shelves, it's not taking as much as it really should be. About a quarter of it's only about a quarter of our supplies actually being used right now. The biggest thing that I would start to worry about, and I do start to worry about, is that what about the healthcare workers? They see the stuff sitting on the shelf. They know it's going to be prophylactically protective, right? So if you take this stuff, you're much more, your defenses are great for 150 days or so. And so the risk is that doctors, nurses start to see this stuff and start to say, let me take that. And if they enough of them do that, we're going to have a very fast movement toward selecting for a mutation that's going to get around the antibodies and all of our antivirals. Of course, we have that increased transmission, and we saw that result with the B1.1.7 variant in the UK, and that's what happens, right? We need to have a lot better PPE, a lot better diagnostic testing, a lot better distancing, and that's what UK did. They said, everybody, no one's allowed to see anyone outside their families. You can have up to 6 people for dinner. That's it. That's got to be within your family, and they got to be living in the same home. You can't go out shopping. I mean, it's really draconian over there right now, in the entire country. I mean, we're not talking about little pieces here. It's the whole country shut down. And then,
So
of
do
course,
they have like food delivery to them? And how do they eat then, right?
a lot more delivery. Yeah, a
Okay.
lot more delivery, and if you're not working, they've got no one's allowed on the streets after 8 p.m. You know,
Really?
yeah, no, unless you're going to work, or have an emergency, that no more walking the dog. Oh, it's time to, no, no, none of that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking
Serious
big
stuff
shift.
there. Yeah.
And then, of course, the last issue that we got is that it could shift enough that most of our diagnostics are also focused on the spike protein, because it's the most important part of the virus. And for us, it's most exposed. It's already there. We can attach ourselves to it and detect it. Um, and we're already starting to see that happen, that certain parts of these variants can't be detected by certain kinds of PCR testing already. And that's our
Mm,
most
wow.
accurate testing. So you can imagine the antigen testing that are coming out, they're going to become even less accurate, if these mutations become large enough to affect.
It's like
You know.
the Black Plague from 1300s has returned here or something. God.
Well, it did concern me. I'm hoping that this won't happen. Um, but there's enough suggestive evidence here that says if we don't get our monitoring up, if we don't start genetically testing a lot more and knowing where these things are coming from and who's got which kind of virus, and how fast it's mutating, and which drugs are best for that one versus this one, we're going to get in real trouble really fast. I think. Unfortunately, it could beat us. So
Yeah.
we're starting to see the first volley. They won the first volley. We've come back now with our vaccine. We're winning, but they're going to come back with their response, right? So we got to keep vigilant.
And I thought one of the stark pictures that I saw from New Year's Eve was in all the capitals of the world except China. Everybody was like, nobody was on the streets, but in China, there were millions of people out whooping it up. And I'm thinking, what? So yeah, crazy, huh?
Yeah. No, even in Australia, where they're really trying to, there was no one on the bridge this year in Sydney and so on. It was wild. And New York, I mean,
Yeah, I watched Times Square. I mean,
Times.
normally you got a million people, thank God, packed in there. And this year it was just the TV people.
Yeah, yeah, I am worried about all the travel. And the problem. And I've done, next week we can talk a little bit about projections, because I've done my projections for through April 1st now. Lock
Ah,
those in. I was I was within 200 people, on accuracy from my November projections in terms of death.
all right, I
It
guess
doesn't
we'll
make me
let you
happy.
have that. I mean, 200 is okay, but you got to do better next time, Fred. So,
That's less than 1/10%.
yes.
So
Okay,
it was
yeah, well,
luck.
that,
I mean,
that will
that's
be.
luck when you get that close. But we will talk a little bit about now. Now the reason that I'm so worried is because these mutations, they can affect my models. I'm going to have to now put in my model an even higher number than I was anticipating before, which is already in the 570,000 by
Oh,
April 1st, and now we're going to exceed that because
oh.
of these mutations. It's worrisome.
Gosh, we could have a million people dead by summer, right? If all things go wrong.
Oh, well, if we do it badly, yeah, I don't think we're going to be. I don't think we're going to be in the, even in the mid 600s, but that's still a lot of people. I mean, that's so many people.
That's another 300,000 from where we're at.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah,
And everybody was thinking it was just old people that were dying, but now it's all over the places. Young people, middle-aged people, everybody, right?
yeah. I mean, the thing is, the virus found the easiest first, right? And that was the nursing homes.
Right.
They got into the nursing homes with transmitting nurses with vulnerable people. So if you look at the early data, you know, nursing home population was 1% of the total population, and it was 40% of the total death. And
Hmm.
now we're seeing a real flattening of that, and we're starting to see that the nursing homes are protecting themselves better, and now it's going to the general population a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I, this is your field and not mine. I just never thought of a virus as being smart, but clearly they are, right?
Yeah, if you got enough, there's some really famous books that are, like the I forgot the exact name, but it talks about the fact that if you get enough mutation and enough variation, and you have enough selection pressure, you can
Sure.
create the Swiss watch,
Okay.
out of a link of DNA.
All
Uh,
right. I just got flagged by Dave.
uh-oh, Dave's giving us the hook.
He's got other stuff he has to do, and so we appreciate him engineering the show. So we'll talk about all these things next week. What we didn't get to this week,
Absolutely.
it just seems like there's always so much to talk about, right?
I know, I think every day, every week we talk and I say, oh, that's it. We're done now. And that, but next week we've got a
Typically.
million more things to talk about.
But wait, there's more.
Wait, there's
But
more.
wait, yes. God.
So it's a pleasure, but I wish we wouldn't have as much to talk about. Actually, that would be a
Yes.
lot better.
Yes, I mean it never seems to scare. I think I can't be any more concerned or scared from the previous show, and then you come up with the new stuff that scares me even more.
Oh, well, I was
So,
scared. These are guys who are used to seeing viruses. They've been all over the world like I have, and guys who I know who are very calm were saying this
oh
doesn't.
boy, yeah, this isn't good. Yeah, okay, we'll leave everyone with that thought. Oh boy, this isn't good. And so come back next week, and Fred will have even worse news for
I
you.
hope not. No, I hope not. Things will get better.
Traditional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.